I was 6 when my parents told me they couldn't afford me anymore. That's the sentence that burned itself into my brain. Not "we love you," not "we'll come back." Just "we can't afford you." At that age, I didn't understand what afford meant. I thought maybe I was too loud, or too clumsy, or maybe I broke too many things. My mom was pregnant with my little sister then, and my dad kept saying things like, "We have to be practical now." The day they dropped me off at the children's home, my mom cried for about 30 seconds before walking away. My dad didn't even turn around. He handed the staff my small pink backpack and said, "She's allergic to peanuts," then left. I ran after the car barefoot, screaming for them to wait. They didn't even slow down. The orphanage wasn't a kind place. It wasn't the horror movie version of abuse, but it was the slow, invisible kind, the one that makes you question if you deserve love at all. We had one caretaker for every 10 kids. The food was cold, the blankets smelled like mold, and every bedtime was a battlefield of whispered crying. The older kids bullied the younger ones, not because they were evil, but because it was the only way to feel powerful in a place where no one cared about you. I remember once a girl named Rita poured cold water into my bed while I was sleeping, just so the staff would think I peed myself. I had to wash my sheets at 2 a.m. in the freezing hallway sink. No one helped me. When I told the caretaker, she just said, "Stop tattling. Maybe they wouldn't pick on you if you stopped crying all the time." That night, I made a promise to myself. I would never let anyone see me cry again. Birthdays were the hardest. I used to wait, year after year, thinking maybe my parents would come back. The staff used to hand me generic birthday cards that said, "From your family." I always knew they were fake, but I still kept them hidden under my pillow like treasures. When I was 9, a volunteer came to take Christmas photos for donors. She asked me to smile. I told her, I don't know how. She thought I was joking. I wasn't. The years blurred together, foster families came and went, none of them wanted to commit long-term. I was too quiet, too shy, or too damaged. The truth was, I was terrified of getting attached again. I'd already been left once. I couldn't survive that a second time. At 13, I found out my parents were doing well again. One of the staff mentioned she'd seen them in town. Apparently they had moved into a bigger house, and my little sister went to a private school. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. They hadn't even tried to find me. Not once. When I turned 16, I got my first job cleaning tables in a small cafe near the orphanage. The owner, an older woman named Mara, used to slip me free muffins when no one was looking. She was the first adult who ever looked me in the eye and said, "You're worth something, kid." That sentence did what years of therapy couldn't. I started saving every penny I could. I studied at night after shifts, using old textbooks Mara found for me. I didn't tell anyone my plan, but I had one. I would get out, I would study, and I would never depend on anyone again. On my 18th birthday, I packed my few things, some clothes, my notebook, and those fake birthday cards, and walked out of that place. No one stopped me. No one even noticed I was gone. I thought that was the end of my loneliness. I was wrong. Because even when you escape the orphanage, the feeling of being unwanted doesn't just disappear. It lives inside you, whispering that no matter what you do, you'll never be enough. But I didn't know then that one day, those same people who threw me away would come knocking on my door, not because they loved me, but because they needed me. And this time I wouldn't cry. I'd make sure they'd remember what too expensive really meant. When I turned 18, I walked out of the orphanage with a plastic bag full of worn-out clothes and a single $20 bill. No one said goodbye. No one even looked up from their breakfast. I stood outside the iron gates for a long time, not sure where to go. That was the thing about growing up in a place like that. They prepared you to survive, not to live. The first few months were brutal. I found a tiny room above a laundromat that smelled like detergent and mold. The wallpaper peeled off like old skin, and sometimes I'd wake up to cockroaches crawling on the walls. But it was mine. For the first time, I had a door that locked from the inside. I got a job wiping tables at a cafe nearby. The owner, Mara, was in her late 50s, with kind eyes and a voice that always sounded tired but gentle. She paid minimum wage, but sometimes she'd slip me leftover pastries at the end of the shift. Once, when she saw me counting coins to afford a bus ticket, she said quietly, "Keep your money. Walk with pride, kid. The world already takes too much from you." I didn't know how much those words meant until years later. Every night after work, I'd study in my room using an old lamp I found in the trash. I wanted to go to college, not because I thought it would fix me, but because I needed a way out. I read used textbooks Mara helped me find at flea markets. She'd drop them on the counter and say, "These pages will build your future, kid. Don't waste them." When she convinced me to apply for a scholarship, I almost laughed. No one's going to give a scholarship to a nobody from an orphanage. But she looked at me, dead serious, and said, "Someone will. Because you're not a nobody. You're just someone they haven't met yet." She was right. The day I got the acceptance letter from a community college, I ran all the way to the cafe. Mara was slicing lemons behind the counter. I threw my arms around her and cried so hard I couldn't speak. She didn't say anything. She just held me and whispered, "See? You just needed one person to believe." College wasn't easy. I worked 2 jobs, cafe in the morning, office cleaning at night. I barely slept. Some days, my hands trembled from exhaustion while I poured coffee for customers. I'd hide in the storage room during breaks, reading business textbooks with a flashlight. Sometimes, I'd stare at my reflection in the cafe window and think, if I just keep going, maybe I'll finally feel like I belong somewhere. Money was always tight. I ate cheap noodles for weeks. There were nights I sat in the dark because I couldn't pay the electric bill. Once, I fainted during class because I hadn't eaten in 2 days. The professor didn't even notice. But I refused to stop. When I graduated, I landed an unpaid internship at a small accounting firm. I remember my boss saying, "We can't pay you, but you'll learn." So I learned. I showed up early, stayed late, volunteered for every project. The others laughed at me for working so hard for free. I didn't care. Every hour there felt like another brick in the wall between me and the past. After 6 months, the boss called me into his office. "You don't know how to quit, do you?" he said, half smiling. I shook my head. "Good, because I need someone like that. You're hired." That first paycheck, $1,200, felt like gold. I stared at it for an hour before depositing it. Then I went to Mara's cafe and left a small envelope on the counter. Inside was half the money. She found me later and scolded me for it, but her eyes were wet. From there, things snowballed. I moved to the city, got promoted, and started building connections. By 25, I was managing clients. By 27, I opened my own financial consulting firm. My name was finally on an office door. I'd done it. One night, I stood in front of my floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights. I thought of the orphanage, the smell, the loneliness, the broken little girl who thought she'd never matter. And for the first time, I whispered to myself, "You made it." Years passed. My company grew. I hired people who'd been through hard times, single mothers, foster kids, refugees. I wanted to be the person Mara had been for me. Then, one afternoon, my assistant knocked on my office door. "Ms. Hale," she said, her voice careful, "there are 2 people here asking for you. They say they're your parents." For a moment, I thought she was joking. My parents. The same people who left me at an orphanage because I was too expensive. The ones who built a new life without me. I told my assistant to send them in. When they walked into my office, I barely recognized them. My father looked smaller, tired. My mother's hair was streaked with gray, but her posture was the same, that quiet, self-righteous stance that said we did what we had to do. "Hello, darling," my mother started, as if we'd just had a small argument years ago, not a lifetime of silence. "Don't call me that," I said. My voice surprised even me. Calm, steady, cold. They sat down, pretending everything was normal. They told me about how they'd fallen on hard times, that my father had lost his job, that they needed help paying their mortgage. My sister, the one they kept, was doing her best, but couldn't support them alone. I listened quietly. When they were done, my father leaned forward and said, "You're successful now. We're still family, aren't we?" I looked at him for a long moment. Family. The word tasted like poison. I stood, walked to the window, and said, "Do you remember what you told me when you left me at that orphanage?" My mother frowned. "That we couldn't afford you." "Yes," I said softly. "And now, it seems you can't afford your own life either." They didn't understand at first. But when I turned back, my face made it clear. I built everything I have without you, I said. Not a penny, not a word, not a single ounce of love came from you. You made it clear I was too expensive to keep, so don't expect me to be cheap to buy back. My father's face went pale. My mother started crying. I didn't move. I didn't comfort her. I'd done enough crying for all of us. I'll have my assistant call security to escort you out, I said quietly. You can tell my sister she's welcome to apply for a job if she wants to earn something. As they left, I felt nothing. No joy, no sadness. Just peace. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the abandoned child anymore. I was the woman they could never afford to keep or to face. After they left my office that day, I thought it was over. I thought that closing the door behind them would also close that chapter of my life. But the universe never lets wounds heal quietly. 2 weeks later, I started getting calls from numbers I didn't recognize. When I finally answered one, it was my sister. I know you're busy, she began, her voice soft but practiced. But Mom and Dad really need your help. You can't just leave them like that. I almost laughed. Leave them? They left me, I said flatly. 24 years ago. Remember that. She sighed. You don't understand what they went through. Oh, I understand perfectly. I lived it. And then I hung up. For a while, they stopped calling. Then the messages started showing up online. Comments under my company's social media posts. People claiming I was an ungrateful daughter, that I'd abandoned my poor aging parents. I knew exactly where it came from. They'd started telling people in their small town that I had forgotten my family. That after becoming rich, I refused to help the people who raised me. They left out the part where they'd literally thrown me away. My PR manager suggested we make a public statement to clarify, but I didn't want to explain myself. I wanted the truth to speak for itself. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a charity gala, a fundraiser supporting foster kids. The event was fancy, high profile, full of cameras and reporters. It felt ironic, standing in front of people who had never known what it was like to grow up unwanted. Still, I agreed to speak. That night, I wore a simple black dress and no jewelry. I didn't need anything flashy. I wanted my words to do the shining. The ballroom was full. The audience was quiet when I stepped on stage. I took a deep breath. When I was 6, I began. My parents told me they couldn't afford to keep me. You could feel the air shift. People leaned forward, waiting. I grew up in an orphanage. I learned early that love, apparently, had a price tag. And I wasn't worth it. For years, I thought that made me broken. But it didn't. It made me hungry, for knowledge, for freedom, for a life that wasn't defined by anyone else's decisions. I told them about the nights I studied under a flickering light, about Mara and the cafe, about working 2 jobs to survive. And then I said quietly, today I own a company that helps others climb out of the same holes I once lived in. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that your worth isn't measured by who keeps you, it's measured by how you keep going when no one else will. The room was silent when I finished. Then came applause, hesitant at first, then louder, then thunderous. Cameras flashed, but as I stepped off the stage, I froze. At the back of the room, standing near the exit, were my parents. My father, wearing a cheap suit that didn't fit. My mother, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. They were watching me. For a moment, I saw it, the shock in their faces, the realization of what they'd thrown away. I walked toward them. My mother tried to smile. We saw your speech, she said weakly. We're so proud of you, darling. I looked her straight in the eyes. Are you? Or are you proud of what I became without you? She blinked, and I saw the guilt flicker there, the guilt she buried for years under excuses. My father cleared his throat. We didn't have a choice back then. Things were hard. You have to understand that. I do, I said calmly. You made a choice. And so did I. You chose to give up your daughter. I chose to never give up on myself. They didn't have a response. Just silence. Then my mother said the one thing that broke whatever pity I had left. Well, you could still help us now, can't you? We're your family. I smiled. Not kindly. Family isn't the people who abandon you when it's inconvenient. Family is the people who show up when they don't have to. You taught me that. A few people nearby had started noticing the scene. Phones were out. Cameras too. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had wanted attention. Now they had it. I leaned closer to my mother and whispered, "You said I was too expensive to keep, so consider this the bill." Then I turned to the security guard by the door and nodded. "Please escort my guests out." The crowd parted as they were led away. My mother tried to say something, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of clapping for me, for the girl who was left behind, but refused to stay small. That night, after the gala, I went to Mara's seaside cottage. She made tea and listened quietly as I told her what had happened. When I was done, she said something that stuck with me forever. Forgiveness doesn't mean they win. It means they can't hurt you anymore. I realized then that I had already forgiven them, not for them, but for me. Because carrying that anger was like keeping a ghost alive. So I donated a large sum to the orphanage where I grew up, but under one condition. The money could only be used to fund therapy, books, and educational programs for the kids. Not once did I put my parents' names on anything. Weeks later, a letter arrived from my sister. It said, "I never understood what you went through. I do now. I'm sorry." I never replied. Not out of hate, but because I finally didn't need their apologies. Some nights, I still dream of that little girl on the orphanage steps, barefoot and crying. But now, when I see her, she's not begging the car to stop. She's walking the other way, head high, eyes forward, smiling. Because she finally knows she wasn't too expensive. She was priceless,